Today we shall be having an interesting discussion with the Australian Ambassador to the United States of America, Arthur Sinodinos. Having grown up in Newcastle to Greek migrant parents, Arthur went on to become an economist, ending up as chief advisor to Prime Minister John Howard for about a decade. After a number of years of corporate leadership, he went on to become senator in the federal parliament before being appointed as ambassador to the USA in 2020. The Honourable Arthur Sinodinos, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Pate. Great to be with you. Good to see you again.
We do miss you, Arthur. The community here in Australia, and specifically Rose Bay, where you were attending.
So do I.
And you were living in Rose Bay for a little while as well. We always loved seeing you with us and being part of our community, especially your family, your wife and kids. Give them our love.
Thank you.
So, Arthur, today I wanted to have a discussion for the benefit of our audience on, politics, civics, as in civic participation and community. And, this is important not just for the world at large, but for the church as well, because the church is organised along communal lines, community lines. And there's an interesting element of structure, community structure, political structure, some democratic elements together with the hierarchical elements at play in the way the church community works. So we'll get to that too, but I want to start with, basic principles. When we use the word politics, most people use it as a bad word, like they say, I can't stand the politics, or I don't want the politics, I'm out of this, don't want the politics. And this could be applicable in the workplace, it could be applicable in family life, but certainly also in community life at large. Let's talk about politics first as a good word. What is your reading of ancient Greek ideals of civic participation? What is the origin of the word politics in a good sense?
Well, I think the origins of it in a good sense was of a community which people respected each other. There was a set of rules by which people governed their interaction with others. Sometimes it would be via a constitution, which was written or unwritten, but the idea was to create a set of rules by which people would abide. In the American context, they talked about the rule of laws rather than of men. The idea being that we can regulate our behavior. And this idea of a polity is a place where this comes together. I don't agree that politics should be considered a dirty word. I know why some people say that, but I think it's quite a noble calling, because it's really about how we come together as a community to administer, to run our community, hopefully in the interest of all. This is the eternal challenge of politics. And much of the controversy in politics comes from really whether our political structures adequately represent our community and the streams of opinion in our community. And in today's world, you don't have to be in politics to play politics. And there are so many outlets, including in social media, which means that you can galvanize movements. So increasingly, politics is not just about what we do through the parliamentary process. It's impacted by all these other modes of communication that we talked about before. But in its essence, is how we regulate our lives in a way which creates civilized behavior and leads to outcomes, hopefully, in the interest of the community as a whole.
So where does the word politics come from?
Well, it's related to words like polis, the polis, which is a bit like the state, as it were, the
city.
And it's funny, there are words like politismos, which is a bit more like the word culture in a sense.
Or civilization.
Or civilization, exactly. Yeah. So it really goes to this sense of order and how you create that sense of order.
The art of living together.
Exactly.
So that reminds me of the statement by Winston Churchill that democracy is the worst form of government, except for all the others. So that's an honest statement in that we recognise the flaws and the shortcomings of any political system, even the best ones, but we're still forced to work with something. We can't have nothing. We can't have anarchy.
Anarchy is in some anarchy and chaos are the worst sort of system. And he was very honest, as you say, in accepting that democracy had its blemishes, its challenges, but there's been no better system invented for trying to get people to live with each other in a peaceable way. And the challenge of the modern era is how, at the international level, nation states live together, and that we regulate behavior so the strong cannot just, if you like, lord it over the weak or the smaller entities, the great powers lording it over smaller powers and middle powers, where it's really then a Hobbesian. Thomas Hobbes talked about the law of life being nasty, brutish, and short. The brutality of that sort of law of the jungle, if you like.
You reminded me of Thucydides' statement now, the one where it was the strong do as they will and the weak suffer as they must, which is
indeed
a realistic assessment of what happens in reality and in history. But you're saying that this could be mitigated, this could be controlled, this could be diminished as much as we can.
Well, that is the sort of liberal international order that was established after World War II. And the United States, in one of the greatest acts of enlightened self-interest, brought Japan and Germany, its enemies, into that order, made them part of that order, made sure that democracy took root in both countries, strongly took root, and that they were players in the international community, which was then regulated by a whole set of rules and new institutions. And what's happened in Russia and Ukraine is that one person has decided to invade another country with a sovereign, democratically elected government in breach of that fundamental international order. And this is what we're grappling with. What does that international order look like in the light of what Russia has done? Where does this leave us in relation to China going forward? And the importance of sending a message as the West, the liberal West, liberal in the good sense of the word, in terms of liberal democratic values, decent, humane, universal values. How do we reassert those values and make sure those values prevail in the world? We've been fortunate that the most powerful country in the world for so long has been a democratic country, a country with its own strengths and weaknesses, but fundamentally a country that wants peace and has helped set up this international set of rules we've seen since World War II.
You've mentioned the liberal democracies as being, where we've ended up as a civilization as the best system, or vice versa, the lesser of all the evils, just restating Winston's statement. So the next question is going to be that, well, okay, so we have a liberal democracy. It's not a direct democracy like Athens was. We can talk about that. It's representative democracy. And all of us have been able to see that even within the democratic representative system, that interest groups, ideologies can hold sway and implement things that are not necessarily beneficial to society and community. So I'm not just talking about far left or far right. Even centre left and centre right have instituted things democratically, but have ended up not being good for their people or for community. So the question I have for you here is, democracy is one thing for this civilization, but can we also speak about democracy being without other values like, freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of just generally freedom? Can democracy stifle the freedom of minorities or people who are in opposition to the majority?
That's an important question, and it's been recognized that you can have a tyranny of the majority and that this can have an adverse impact on minorities. So inherent in, I think, the best models of how democracy works are safeguards for the rights of minorities, which means safeguards for the rights of people to say things that may be unpopular, but they should not be stopped from saying them simply because you don't agree with them. There was, I think, there was a famous revolutionary from the American Revolutionary period. I think it was Patrick Henry. I'll have to try and remember his name properly. But he said that I may not agree with you, but I'll die defending your right to say it. And so inherent, I think, in democracy properly applied is safeguards for the rights of minorities, grounded in the sacredness of the individual, the sanctity of the individual, and the rights of the individual. And I'm not talking here in a narrow, personal, selfish sense, but the sanctity of each human being, which goes back really to Christian concepts. But the important thing is, if you have a democracy which is grounded in an understanding and a support for the rights of the individual, the sanctity of the individual, that helps you to then have a way of thinking about how you structure your democracy to also preserve the rights of minorities. So inherent in what I'm saying is that freedom of speech, freedom of association, freedom of religion or belief, these are all inherent in how a democratic polity should work.
I mentioned all this because there have been some instances in Australia, but also worldwide, where some ideological proponents have instituted laws or ideas or concepts which, in their view, is righteous and correct and justified. I'll just use a benign example, the whole debate about pronouns. And, for the people who argue that point, they think that it is correct that we have specific pronouns used that aren't the normal pronouns. We can't be calling people he or she necessarily, or Mr. or Mrs. or all this business. Now, to me, that's I don't understand all that. I don't see the problem in that. As in, I might want to call a male he and a female she, but I'm increasingly thinking that there'll be a time very soon where if I refuse to do so against what has been instituted as the law by majority, that I would be sanctioned, persecuted, fined, or shamed, publicly shamed. I think that's already happening. So that's why I mentioned freedom of religion, because religion also gives parameters of how I think and how I view the world. And that's very, very different to some of the ideologies which are prominent in our liberal democratic parliaments. So I understand it's going to be a delicate balance, but that's where I feel freedom, just generally freedom, is the answer here. And people shouldn't insist on their own way. How do you see that question?
Well, one way in which I think some people try to square the circle is to say that ultimately we have to have respect for people's conscience. That if you strongly believe something, as long as you're not harming someone else, you should be able to exercise your individual conscience. It does get into slippery territory when you talk about whether you should be sanctioned for offending someone for not saying something in the way they want things to be said. So it's like all these things. There's got to be common sense. What's happened with pronouns, I suppose, is that to protect some people who may have found themselves in a particular state, and this would be a minority of people, there's been a tendency to, in a blanket way, say, well, this is how we deal with it, to take away the pressure they may feel if they're in a world where only he or she is recognized. But as long as we respect the right of everybody in the public square to have their say, and as long as we have politicians who are prepared to pragmatically work out, and I've seen some of the politicians who can do this. John Howard was like this. You pragmatically work out a way forward rather than say one side has to be right and the other one has to be wrong. Often you've got to understand what is behind what someone is saying. What is the issue they're seeking to, the mischief they're seeking to address or to fix. So ultimately, vigorous public debate in a democracy with freedom of speech and the transparency that comes with that can often bring to the surface ways in which these issues can be sorted. And the courts also, because it often falls to them to interpret the laws based on precedent and whatever, and the intent of the parliament, often it falls to them to actually try and find a balance. Now, that balance ideally should always be found in the parliament, so that it reflects the views of the whole community. So these issues, Pater, will come up in all sorts of contexts as we deal with issues about people's identity and how they self-identify. If someone self-identifies a certain way, what are we meant to do about that? Do we say, yes, you've got the right to identify as such, and I've got to respect that right, or I can identify you whatever way I want to identify you? It's really, how do we have respect for each other that we can understand where the other is coming from and work our way through that? And that also does mean, when I said before, respect for conscience, that if I, as a co-religionist, as a Christian, or you as a Christian, have a certain firmly held, sincerely held belief, that also should be respected. That's what respecting someone's conscience is about.
Yeah, you're saying it cuts both ways. We've got to find that middle ground of respect.
But it works best when people engage with each other. That's my other point.
I see. In dialogue, yeah. You meet each other
in dialogue. I mean, we've tried to do this in Indonesia, for example, after the Bali bombings. We had an interfaith dialogue, the purpose of which was for Christian denominations, people of Muslim faith and others to try and understand each other better and try and get rid of some of the stereotypes and try and marginalize some of those who sought to push things to extremes.
Okay. In your next question, in your political journey or your life's journey, have you had a chance to have a read of Plato's Republic? Because the question I have on Plato's Republic is, did he actually espouse a republic? Did he espouse what we have, a representative democracy, or did he actually espouse something else?
Yeah, I mean, it's a long time since I've had anything to do with Plato's ideas. I haven't read the Republic as a whole, but I think my interpretation of what he was getting at was that the Republic, it was about how you reflect the will of the people, right? The very word republic is about that. It was essentially the rule by the people, by the public. And the question was, what did that mean in practice and how did you manifest it? And I think we've spent years since trying to adapt the sort of democratic principles that flowed from how people in ancient Greece sought to reflect these sorts of values. And we've come up with different systems. The system in the US as a republic is different to the system in Australia, which, by the way, is a constitutional monarchy. the way people are elected in the US is different to Australia. Both have their strengths and weaknesses. Both claim to be vigorous democracies. I like the Australian focus on compulsory voting because it forces everybody to have a view and to have a say. I like the independent electoral commissions, which help to draw up the electoral boundaries. They're, I suppose, aspects of the Australian democratic experience which I think are very important. So I'd like your view on that in terms of Plato's Republic.
I could be wrong, but my reading of Plato's Republic is that he actually did not believe that democracy was the best system. There were elements of democracy in what he was espousing, but
he was in favour of a meritocracy, wasn't he?
That's it. It was a meritocracy, and now he used the word aristokratia, aristocracy, but he meant what we call a meritocracy. Aristos is the meritorious. So yes, he espoused that meritocracy, which is nice. I like to hear that. But he espoused the meritocracy where, yes, there was a process of selection of those of merit and ability, but you placed them in power because they knew what they were doing. Now, having said that, historical knowledge tells us that anyone in power, whether it be absolute power or partial power, can be corrupted by that power. So you can't have people perpetually there, as meritorious as they can be. So you want those checks and balances in place. And of course, the Enlightenment has a lot to say about those checks and balances, rules of law, and these are all respected by all of us, including the Church. So
Father Jerry, where I think there's some compromise is you take the concept of meritocracy and you say, for example, we will have an independent public service. We will have a professional standing army. We'll have a parliament which will reflect the will of the people so that there is guidance to the technocrats who are selected on merit to do policy and implement policy. But ultimately, there is a group of people accountable to the public for what happens. Because you're right, when accountability is taken away or shifted from a group of people, it does become an issue of how power is exercised and in whose interest. Now, the challenge in modern societies, and we saw this here in the US with the rise of Trump. Trump didn't cause this, but he was maybe a symptom of it. There was a feeling in many parts of the US that the Congress did not represent them. Washington did not represent them. They felt marginalized. They felt Congress was dominated by other interests, not by them. These are voters in the Midwest, many lower, non-college educated white voters feeling under pressure, etc. So even in a democracy, people can feel their voice is not being heard. But what happened is the system throws up people, and Trump is an example. Some of them are called populists. They say, yes, I can hear that. I can hear you've got a problem. If you send me to Washington, I'm an outsider. I'm not tainted by Washington. I will drain the swamp in Washington.
So he channeled
that had appeal to people who felt powerless within the system.
So that's a lesson to be learnt by everyone, that democracy and parliamentary systems do need to be attentive to everyone. Otherwise, you're going to have such side effects. And this cuts both left and right. You mentioned parliaments and congresses. The ancient Greek word for the assembly of the people was ekklesia tou Dήμου.
Yes.
As an attendee and as a Greek Orthodox Christian from your birth, obviously being from a Greek Orthodox family, what parallels do you see with the fact that that's the Greek word for church as well? Why would the Christian community name its body, the church, as ekklesia, which is exactly the same word as the assembly of the people. Was there a democratic element in this, or was this an accident of history?
No, I think there was a democratic element. The important thing, if you're a religious believer, is if you have people you can come together with who share your beliefs, that collective, that obviously makes you more influential, better able to protect yourself than if you're just individuals who go around believing and do not come together. There's much greater strength together. And I think the early church needed to come together and develop these institutions, even though people attack the existence of institutions. The thing is, those institutions have perpetuated and been a vehicle for beliefs to be transmitted through time and for the word to be spread around the world through that mechanism. I mean, I don't want to go into theological stuff on this, but really that became the collective, which guarantees the capacity of the individual to exercise their rights to believe, and to worship as they wish. And because they worship together, it's like we all keep an eye on each other. So it helps each of us.
Community is so ecclesia and community as an extended family are paralleled here. Are you aware sorry, keep going.
I was just going to say, so when I was growing up in Newcastle, see, a lot of our social life was built around the Greek Orthodox Church, ecclesiastical life and social life. It became the social centre. It was a centre for the maintenance and perpetuation of culture, maintenance and perpetuation of the language. It was a vehicle to express belief. We had the seasons, which were defined by the various religious festivals. This was the rhythm of the year, the religious year. And that created the basis on which we operated and dealt with each other. And by each of us being in there, even if as individuals we may have our strengths and weaknesses, by being together and practicing our beliefs together, we're stronger together.
So what we have here expressed in the Greek Orthodox Church, which is a continuity in many respects from ancient Greek culture. You've got ancient Greek people who chose to become Christian, and they carried through many of the elements of their culture and civilization which they already had. And of course, by the same token, for the record, many things from the ancient Greek past were jettisoned. So the Greek expression of religion is a communal one. This idea of religion being a personal thing, we often hear that these days. Oh, religion's a personal thing. That's my business. I think you could agree with me that for the Greek, both pagan and Christian religions, it's more than just personal. It starts personal, but it's expressed and strengthened communally.
Look, this may sound an odd statement to make, but I think we're better Christians for being Christians together. That's my view.
Makes perfect
sense. One supports the other.
That's right. Okay, so the next question I'm going to have for you is this. So, and I used the word accident of history before to say, well, okay, well, the church names itself ecclesia either by continuity or by accident, because the word is just assembly and the gathering of people. But does the Orthodox Church have democratic elements? Is it just hierarchy, or are there democratic elements? I know the answer, but let me put that to you first.
Well, I don't know what your answer is. But look, there is an element of hierarchy that overlays this on the priestly side in particular. And there's a logic to that. And the logic is that priests have got to be a professional class, if you like. Like, you can't have a situation where each parish just votes who their priest is, right? you have professionals who do the job, who've been trained for many years to do the job and carry the gravitas and the credibility that goes with that. Then the question of how you organise the parish administration, the parish finances, is, I think, a separate question. And hopefully on that side, and I've been involved in parish communities in Canberra and in Sydney, my observation is encouraging maximum participation in the administration, whether it's directly through parish councils or philoptochos and other bodies, is very important to the vitality of a religious community. And so I always err on the side of giving more accountability and transparency to the lay people within the context of a setup where there is a fidelity on doctrinal matters. So you're not setting up a situation where people can just say, I'm going off to be with X because that autocephalous church is somehow better for me, or it'll give me more power, whatever. We have to work within a hierarchy. That's why I've always been a strong supporter of the Archdiocese in that regard.
So a mixed system of government.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's very important, because at the same, you mentioned priests being a professional class, people who know what they're doing. That's
Yes.
the meritocracy side.
Yes.
But by the same token, you want maximum participation of every member of the community to have a say and an input. That's extremely valuable for the church. And you also mentioned,
you remember in the Bible there was this issue about Greeks and Jews in the early Christian communities having a debate over which widows were getting support or not getting support. And the apostles said, look, this is not our job to work out this sort of thing. And they asked the laity to elect a number of people whose job it was to work out the administration, make sure the widows of the different communities were looked after, the social safety net, in other words, that they had, etc.
This is exactly where I wanted to go with this question. So they didn't appoint, the apostles did not appoint those deacons by themselves. They actually got the general people, the congregation, to do the electing. So you also mentioned before the word council. This is extremely important in the church, because if we were to give a word to the church's governmental system or system of governance, it's not actually hierarchy. It is actually conciliarity. There are systems of councils at play, local, regional, and worldwide, which determine decision-making and the progress of the community. Now, the Greek word for council is synodos, and your surname, Sinodinos, actually means member of the council. And so what we have here is decisions that need to be made. And you mentioned the Greek and the Jewish question in the New Testament church. The question that arose for the apostles, other than the deacon question helping the widows, was, do we allow non-Jews, that is Greeks, Syrians, Romans, Egyptians, to become Christian just like that, or do they have to become Jews first? Can they keep their culture as is and just become Christian? Now, there was no single person. Apostle Peter was still around. All the apostles were still around. No one said, Apostle Peter, you're the leader, you make the decision. There was no such monarchy or dictatorship. They actually decided that the way to make this decision is a council. So they brought all the apostles together in what is known in church history as the Council of Jerusalem, and they prayed over it, they discussed it, they slept on it, and they made a decision by voting. And Apostle Peter was actually on the side of, yes, they have to become Jews first. He lost the vote. Nevertheless, the council prevailed. And so that sets the pace for the entirety of the church's governmental system to this day being a synodal system, a conciliar system. Having said that, now I'm doing my spiel. Can a synod or a council get it wrong? And the answer is, historically, yes, it can get it wrong. But the advantage of the conciliar system is you can have a subsequent council correcting a previous council's decision or ratifying a previous council's decision. So that's the democratic element in the Orthodox Church, the synodal or conciliar system. At the same time, sorry, yes.
I was just going to say, and the importance of a conciliar system or council system is that because people get to have their say, it's more likely, it's like the way cabinets work in government. If people are allowed to have their say, there's a discussion, they either come to a consensus or they have a vote or whatever. The understanding is people will then abide by that vote because they had the chance to put their argument. Their peers considered those arguments, voted accordingly, accept the outcome because it's been derived in a fair way. And yes, you're right. You can rethink it, come back to it later, but it's the very way of doing things and embedding fairness in them then helps to cement consent to those decisions.
Thanks, Arthur. The next question would be a little bit more personal. So can you tell me, you're born into a Greek Orthodox family, and many of us Greeks are just born into a Greek Orthodox family, and our Greek Orthodox faith, belief, or culture and heritage may mean a lot or even nothing to us. To what extent has your Greek Orthodox upbringing informed, coloured, or in any way influenced positively, I would hope only positively, your journey of life from being a young boy in Newcastle, going on to university studies, becoming an economist, reaching the point of chief advisor of the Prime Minister of Australia, and here you are, ambassador of the USA. Maybe you want to talk about your experience of church life in Newcastle or here at Rose Bay while you were in Rose Bay, or your church life in Washington, and what you see as a good thing.
Sure. I guess growing up, I was conscious of being between two cultures. Growing up in a Greek Orthodox family, Greek Orthodox community, I was conscious that, you know, my siblings and I were different to some of the other kids that went to school. We didn't learn, or in my case, didn't learn English until we went to school. We always spoke Greek at home, and that continued even when we grew up. Whilst ever our parents were around, we only spoke Greek with them. It felt strange to speak English to them, unnatural somehow. I think growing up, we experienced a very warm family environment, an extended family. Maybe to some extent that shielded us from the world in some ways, maybe made me a bit naive about the world, I don't know, maybe idealistic about the world. But there was a warmth to Greek culture, Orthodox culture. And as I said before, centered around the local Greek Orthodox Church and the rhythm of the year, getting ready for Easter and the whole pageantry of Easter and the memories it gave you and the richness and the texture it gave to life. But conscious that I was caught between two cultures because I was also born in Australia and I had to be part of the broader community. What I think it taught me, and I only realized this later when I was much older, is it helped me understand what it's like to be a migrant caught between two communities. You're not really a Greek anymore. Sometimes you're not fully accepted as an Australian by some. I didn't experience discrimination, but that idea of acceptance and whatever. So hopefully what that meant over time is that I was more understanding of people who were either migrants or came from minority groups and who had to adjust to a dominant or a host culture and society. So I hope in that sense it made me a more compassionate person, someone who's able to walk in the shoes of the other person. It obviously influenced me about issues to do with Greece. I was quite active in my youth in various Greek associations that had to do with Greek issues, Hellenic issues, including issues around Cyprus, the status of the ecumenical patriarchate, Halki Theological Seminary. You can go through the list. I felt drawn to these issues because of my background. And in my position in government, I didn't seek to abuse my position to push those in a narrow way, but I was conscious of those issues and wanted to make sure they were given a voice where it was possible to do so. I think I was influenced that way as well. But there was a period there where I didn't so much seek to hide my Greek Orthodox background, but I sort of focused on trying to be an Australian. But then I got to a stage where I realized, we're all made up of different components, and ultimately accept the different parts of what you are. You are what you are, and just get on with it and not worry about it and not seek to be something else. Be authentic. Just accept who you are and be yourself.
So we've covered Greek Orthodox life and upbringing as a culture, as what we've inherited. So why would you keep coming to church? Because I find that cultural Christians don't really end up coming to church much. Was it something more personal? Did you find benefit attending church? Did you like church? Did you not like church?
Well, up until my teens, I found it tedious to go to church. But it was interesting, in my teens, late teens, I became more interested in what the church was about and what the teachings were about. And I started to read more. And that got me thinking. It didn't make me think, I should go out and become a priest. I've got a very bad voice anyway. I couldn't chant. I mean, you chant beautifully. I could never do that. But it made me more aware of the richness of what was there, and that, look, this wasn't some set of ancient beliefs, ossified, whatever. These were beliefs that we should be able to practice every day because they apply to us whatever position we're in. If I become a powerful person, that doesn't mean I'm exempt from the laws of human nature and whatever. And many of the teachings were really about our nature and how our nature relates to something beyond ourselves. And that really we have a responsibility about our behavior. And if we're serious, we take responsibility for ourselves, our beliefs and what they are. And it was hard to dismiss Christian beliefs because I think they spoke to something within ourselves, or certainly it spoke to me something within myself. The other thing is Jesus is a very attractive character. Had it very tough, turned the other cheek, was prepared to give up his life on the cross. I think he remains someone who is charismatic to anybody who takes the time to read the Bible and what's there and listens to what he was trying to say.
So you were drawn to Jesus Christ's teaching and life?
Yeah. It's not just the teachings, it's also how he conducted himself.
Yeah.
And so I don't want to make a big thing of it, but it's why I think the work of the church is so important and so valuable going forward. And that's why I either try and attend church in person when I can, or virtually when COVID or whatever was an issue. So here in the US, I've attended St. Sophia Cathedral, which is here very close to where we live. A lot of the time I've had to watch it virtually during the more serious episodes of COVID, and I'm still sort of watching it virtually a lot of the time, but I pop in when I can. I was more regular when I was in Sydney, living in Rose Bay when you started out, and then when before I left to go elsewhere. But I think, but the reason for the regularity is the point we were talking about very early on, which is this idea of the ecclesia as the assembly.
And I appreciate your candidness. What similarities or differences do you see between the church community in Australia, let's say Rose Bay, and the church community at Washington, DC?
On the surface, there are similarities in terms of worship, the way the priests conduct themselves, and the rest. Where I think there are differences is that the Greek community in the US has been here longer on the whole than the community in Australia. So you have fourth and fifth generation people who may not even speak Greek very much, but attending church is very much a part of who they are and what they're about. There are certainly more metropolitans over here than there are in Australia. Archbishop Elphilophorus was only recently enthroned, and they have a system of archons here who are distinguished lay people who have been significant contributors to the church, and they help to raise money for the archdiocese, and they're recognised by the Archbishop and by the Ecumenical Patriarchate. And we, of course, were fortunate to have the Ecumenical Patriarch here before Christmas. Unfortunately, he was a bit ill at the beginning, but he got well enough to meet President Biden and do a number of other things. And we had dinner with him at the Greek ambassador's place on the Saturday night when he first got here. He looms large here because political issues to do with the Patriarchate loom large. So the American Greeks, because of their being situated here in the most powerful country in the world, they're also well organised politically, and they use that to try and seek to promote Hellenic values and Greek national issues.
What did you like about Rose Bay? Let's give my church a plug.
Yeah, no. What I liked about it, well, I liked the priest there. I thought he was very good. Also, it wasn't the biggest community. So there was a warmth that came from the size of the community, people who'd known each other 30, 40, 50, 60 years. I think the outreach to young people, bringing them on, including as chanters, was very important. Your interest in hymnography and music, I think, was great as a way of bringing people in. And your outreach to younger people more generally, I think, has been fantastic. And finding ways to engage them on their terms.
Have you had an opportunity to see any of our live YouTube services during COVID?
On Saturday nights, I sometimes tuned in to watch your service live.
Right.
Because Saturday night here is Sunday morning in Australia.
Yeah, nice to hear. So thank you for your kind words, Arthur. And as I said earlier, we do miss you and your family. And when your tenure finishes in the USA, we would love to have you back. The final question, and this is to test your diplomatic skills now.
Oh, boy. I'm in trouble then.
On February the 24th this year, 2022, the day the invasion of Ukraine was launched, we heard this speech. Know this, we will become a global community over which there will be no power. Remember our motto of one nation, one flag, one homeland, and one state. When we properly mobilize this power, no organization, no evil structure, no hidden or open obstacles can stand in our way. Together we will spoil the plots of those who try to divide our people and together we will bring down their plots on their heads. Now, these words were not spoken by Putin, but by our NATO ally Erdogan, President of Turkey, in rallying Turkish residents of Europe specifically, and Muslims in general, for his vision of a restored caliphate or Ottoman Khanate. So my question to test your diplomatic abilities, Arthur, is why is our opposition to what Russia's doing at the moment good for the goose and not for the gander?
Thank you. I think there are a couple of aspects to this. We have seen in some countries, not just in the Middle East, but in Europe, the rise of what you might call illiberalism, backsliding on democracy, and countries having leaders, populists, who promote ethno-nationalism. One state, one identity, so on and so forth. Whereas countries like Australia, the United States, multiracial, multicultural, it's not about ethno-nationalism. What's happened in the past is when one state has tried to impose its will on others, principally by invasion. We saw this with Saddam Hussein in the early 1990s when he sought to take over Kuwait. The international community has said, this is a bridge too far. It's one thing for leaders to do what they do in their own country, as long as it's not spilling over to others. The reason Putin is in such trouble with the West is that he's attacked a sovereign, democratically elected government. And that's helped to upend the international order. In the case of others, like Erdogan, it just depends on the circumstances. I know what you're getting at, but for the international community to move against someone, there has to be some spillover effect of what they're doing that is impacting on the rest of the region, the continent, the world. What the US strategy has been in the Eastern Mediterranean, and the Greek strategy, I think, is to shore up the relationship between the US and Greece, both at a military level and an economic level. There's a very good ambassador for US in Greece, in Athens, Jeffrey Pyatt, who's done a fantastic job over the last 5 or 6 years of helping to strengthen the relationship. The other thing that's happened is Greece, Cyprus, and Israel have strengthened their relationships. The head of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee here in the US Congress, Senator Bob Menendez, is a very strong, he was in fact in Greece recently getting an award, very strong proponent of American support for Greece. So yes, Turkey is within NATO, it's a NATO member, so things have to be handled a certain way. But the way the US has sought to handle that situation is through its diplomacy, particularly with Greece. But the general principle is that if a country gets to the stage where it's starting to spill over in terms of the impact it has on other countries, as Saddam did in Kuwait, as Putin has done, then the international community will respond. I know that doesn't satisfy everybody, but in the early 2000s, there were those who criticized the US for going into Iraq. Now, they didn't go into Iraq just because of regime change, to impose a new regime on the place. They went in there because there were, we believed, weapons of mass destruction, which would have had an impact on other countries if they were used. And you know, the then Bush administration was criticized for invasion and trying to just create regime change. In other words, you have to have a solid, internationally credible reason to move against a regime.
I understand. Look, let me tell you a bit of spillover, or describe some spillover with Turkey. So in the last year, we've had Turkish claims on the Greek exclusive economic zone in terms of the sea. They want and they're creating maps and holding up maps. This is the foreign ministry of Turkey, holding up maps showing them having half the Aegean, large swathes of the Eastern Mediterranean, which internationally are belonging to Greece and Cyprus. So there's spillover there. You've got spillover into Syria, where the Turks have sent in armies into Syria. You had spillover into Armenia and Azerbaijan, where the Turks helped Azerbaijan in a war, which then Erdogan went and paraded with the president of Azerbaijan, and this was like an image straight out of the 1940s. You got spillover into Libya, where they have sent military equipment and personnel. And in terms of weapons of mass destruction, Turkey is hosting someone's nuclear weapons. Iraq had none of that. I just feel that because they're a NATO ally, they keep getting away with everything. That's how I feel.
Well, I think because unless it leads to a direct hot war, other countries want to resolve these issues where possible diplomatically. So that we're not in a situation where we're just provoking conflict. Spillovers you talked about before, many of them are proxy wars where other countries are arming the opposition. So it's not a perfect situation, but I'm satisfied that it's best for us not to be declaring war on Turkey at the moment.
Oh, I agree. And, we're, as a priest, as a Christian priest, I believe in zero war. But that also means that if someone is preparing for war, becoming strong enough for war, and it's in their national interest or their political interest to declare and conduct war, they will do it. And so my relatives and friends in Greece will lose lives or livelihoods as a result. So I can't be blind to that either.
No, you're right. And often we talk about the need to, if you want peace, prepare for war. In other words, be prepared to do what Germany is doing now and rearming to deter. That's unfortunately the world we're in.
Once again, a delicate balance. Arthur, this has been a fantastic discussion. Thank you for joining us. I'm sure that our entire community, both the Greek community here in Australia and specifically Rose Bay, but also our general audience worldwide, now that we've got a YouTube channel of our own, will have enjoyed this discussion. All the best with your future work and career in the USA, and we look forward to having you back in Australia in due course.
Thank you, Pate. I look forward to catching up with you. And again, best wishes to everybody in Rose Bay. What a wonderful community.
Blessings to all.